So before we can get into week 2 and my Sweet 16, we obviously have to finish one final game that we saw in week 1, and that was Notre Dame heading to Miami, losing that one by a final score of 27-24. And just like for LSU, just like for Florida State, this was a massive win for the Miami Hurricanes. I believe it's their first top 10 victory in nearly 8 years. They were 0-8 in the previous matchups against other top 10 rated teams. So many things to take away from this game and feel good about snowballing into the rest of the year. The first being the defense was night and day better. Complementary football is so important in this sport. Last year, they were very talented up front, but it didn't matter because the secondary was so weak. It really didn't give the time for the defensive front to be used to their best strengths. The secondary very much looked the part of a repaired unit, and it's, a combination of Corey Heatherman coming in as the defensive coordinator, some nice portal additions. They already had a really strong corner that came back to join this team, and it was a really well-rounded effort on Sunday night. Now, there was one blown coverage at the end by Notre Dame, and it wasn't perfect. They did allow Notre Dame's offense late in the fourth quarter to get things rolling. But overall, compared to what Miami got out of its secondary last year, it's hard not to look at this game and say, hey, it may not have been perfect, but it's a lot better than where we were. And in turn, as I said, it helped things up front a whole lot more. The Hurricanes held Notre Dame's offensive line and great run game to just 3.5 yards per carry. Jeremiah Love, best running back in college football, to just 33 yards on the ground. Combining what you had, combining defensively what the Hurricanes were able to do in this game. And again, we're not overreacting, but at the same time, I know that's a good Notre Dame football team, and I know Miami did the best they can to tighten things up at the end. So if you combine the upgrade you got on defense and also not that much of a drop-off offensively, you've got a really good football team here. Carson Beck was awesome. He was awesome, man. 205 yards, 2 touchdowns. Not everything was perfect, but you saw so much of Carson Beck that reminded you of his 2023 season, where he did have a really nice offensive line at Georgia, where he did have really nice run support, where he had really talented wide receivers. Last year was bad, but as I said, coming into this year, there's a few quarterbacks that found themselves into situations like this, Jackson Arnold at Auburn being another. Yeah, you might not be this otherworldly number 1 overall pick that people might have thought you were going to be, but you also need help around you to be good. You need an offensive line. You need run support. I don't know if there's like a Ladd McConkey and Brock Bowers on this Hurricanes team, but the playmakers there seem to be better than they were at Georgia last year, and Beck played the part of a really effective quarterback. Now, does he have the high-end athleticism and these two-way abilities to be a Heisman finalist like Cam Ward was? No. Does he have the ability to keep Miami above average offensively as one of the better offenses in the ACC and push them towards what should be an ACC title game berth? More than enough. He's more than capable of doing that. So I thought the receivers did a nice job making huge plays when it was needed out of them. Obviously, the highlight grab in the end zone there was one of the better catches we've seen in college in quite some time. The movement that Miami generated on both sides of the trenches was massive. When we previewed this game, I said that the Notre Dame defensive front seven is very talented, but I also said that Miami has 3 dudes at 340 pounds or more. And you could just see as the game wore on that Miami's offensive line had the bigger density and just was able to keep generating movement for the ground game. Mark Fletcher, Chamar Brown combined for 120 yards in between the tackles there. Again, everything offensively for the Hurricanes, it didn't maybe flash as much as it did last year, but it had to flash that much last year because everything else around it was so bad. This looks like a fully built out unit for Mario Cristobal and the Hurricanes here. The coaching staff, I love the additions they made, and really, the U feels back. Last year was a missed opportunity because of their defense. They might not have the flash they did last year, but overall, I think the team is in a much better spot. The other thing that was really cool about this game is that, Miami gets out to the big lead. Notre Dame starts marching back a little bit. Your best players made big plays in the most crucial times of the game on both sides of the football. For Francis Maunoa, the offensive tackle, who should be a first-round pick next year, it was, I think, like a 3rd and 4 run where they got stuffed, but Maunoa saw that and pushed the pile for a first down. You had this awesome effort by your best player on offense, and then defensively, Ruben Bain was great the entire game. In those final couple of drives, and specifically the last one where Notre Dame was trying to get into field goal range, Ruben Bain was all over the place, delivered some huge plays there. So it was just very cool. On top of a full-hearted effort for 60 minutes there for complimentary football, when the game was on the line, your best players stood up and made a difference. And I thought that was a huge win for Miami. Hopefully snowballs into what could be a potentially great season in South Florida.
My name's Blake.
Now, to flip things over to the Notre Dame side of the football, I don't walk away from this game being like, oh, that run they had last year was cute. We probably won't see them back in the title conversation again. I thought they put up a hell of a fight, despite everything that was being thrown at them in the first game of a new season. The offense was very clunky. They lost the turnover battle 2-0. They probably had to put a little bit too much pressure on CJ Carr's shoulders, but I thought he also responded well down the stretch. He finished the game with 221 yards, 3 total touchdowns, did have 1 pick. I would say there were some really bad plays. There were also some really good plays. I thought that touchdown run was really impressive, reminded you of kind of the Riley Leonard impact he had on that team last year. I think, all things considered, you put a guy in his first career start in Miami in August, raucous environment against a really good and improved team. I thought he responded well, and I think a game like that is going to be a nice tone setter for the rest of this season. One thing that stood out for Notre Dame the most to me as the game wore on, their big boys were a little gassed. And that was just as the game wore down, the defensive line wasn't able to generate as much movement. It's a very talented front seven, but they got put in a game fresh into the season, fresh into a new year. You know, we talked about how tough it is for defenses to just go from fall camp, go from an off season, then just snap. You're in a new game. You're playing full 60 minutes. For that, it was Notre Dame had to deal with that, but then they also had to be put in Miami in August. I know it's hot around the country. The humidity you have to deal with in that game, 60 minutes of football. The other team has been practicing in that for months straight. I understand why Notre Dame felt a little gassed. This game ended up getting away from Notre Dame's preferred style. You know, they weren't able to generate much movement at all in the ground game. I think that won't be an issue for the rest of the season. They're going to be able to run the football. It was concerning that Jeremiah Love couldn't do too much, but I think the Miami defense really just knew to hone in on that and make CJ Carr beat them. So all in all, Notre Dame got forced outside of their traditional style of football, and we're still there right at the end of the game. So I don't leave this being like, man, I got to bump Notre Dame down a bunch in my power rating system as we head into week 2. I thought in a raucous environment, quarterback had to do a lot in his first career start. They responded really well. I still think Marcus Freeman is one of the best coaches in this sport. And I almost look at this game in kind of like a positive light for the Fighting Irish. Like, yes, because you're not in a conference, you can't really afford to lose your biggest games, and it makes the game with Texas A&M in a couple weeks that much more important. But for the fire that they got thrown into, for the fact that the style of game got taken away from what they traditionally would like to do, they had to throw the football more to keep pace with Miami's offense, I can leave this one saying, I can see why Notre Dame could still be in the picture for a national title when it's all said and done.